Rave to the Grave.
Hi, this is Vivian Host, and you're listening to Rave to the Grave. My guest on today's show is German techno powerhouse Chris Liebing, known for setting dark, melancholic, and epic moods while manipulating huge bass and relentless percussion, often for hours on end. Raised in Gießen, Germany, about an hour from Frankfurt, Liebing committed to house and techno in the mid-90s, becoming a resident at Sven Väth's legendary The Omen Club, and also working at his IQ label. This led to him becoming a staple of the European scene, while he unleashed music on his own record labels like Soap, Audio, and CLR. In 2018, this king of kick drums surprised everybody by releasing a moody, down-tempo electronic album on the iconic Mute Records label. And this year, 2021, he followed it up with Another Day, which finds him dancing closer to musical zen as he collaborates with friends and vocalists, past, present, and future. And meanwhile, Chris Liebing's classic records from the late 90s and early 2000s, along with those from friends like Adam Beyer, Marco Carolla, and Adam X, are experiencing a massive renaissance in the techno clubs around the world. At age 53, a father of two, Liebing has somehow weathered all corners of the techno game while remaining both steadfast and super enthusiastic about the music, the technology, and staying in dark clubs until the sun comes up. I talked to Chris to find out how he literally does it all. Welcome to Rave to the Grave.
Another day. The bridges do not tremble. The vines creep up the pavement. The starlings in the streetlight sing louder than the sirens.
Chris, welcome to Rave to the Grave. It's great to have you here.
Vivian, thank you for having me on Rave to the Grave.
The last time I saw you DJ, I think you were going back to back with Danny Tenaglia in Miami at a WMC, and I got there at like 8 a.m.
What a time that was with another one of my total heroes, Danny Tenaglia. And I remember 95, my first winter music conference, as it was called back then, and me going to, I think it was Groove Jet. The club was called Groove Jet on Washington Boulevard in South Beach. And Danny was playing 12 hours, I don't know. And I was just standing in awe in front of the DJ booth and was just listening to it.
So as I understand, you started off life as a hip hop and like kind of soul and funk DJ. How long was it before you got bitten by the kind of techno or electronic music bug? And what were the first couple records that really made you think like, okay, I want to put techno in my sets?
It was more a mix of a lot of funk, soul, even some acid jazz that was quite big at that time, trip hop in the beginning of the 90s. If I hear hip hop DJ, there was hip hop in there, but I've never been a turntable list or scratching master or anything like this. This was going on till about 92, end of 92. I had a residency in a club for about 2-3 years at that point, playing for a student crowd, sort of anything goes music. And I was always drawn to a little bit the houseier stuff, the more faster stuff, the music around 126, 128 BPM. Although I did love, of course, also like all that stuff around 110 BPM, like Back to Life, Happy Mondays even. I remember it must have been around end of 91, beginning of 92. I went to totally random with my sister and her then boyfriend to a club in a town called Karlsruhe here in Germany because he was living there. And it was kind of a commercial club, and I was standing on the dance floor, beside the dance floor, because I have that in me since I'm DJing, and that is basically since I'm 16 or something like that, that I have to analyze what's going on when I'm like, I cannot just be on a dance floor like, yeah, it's just like, what is the DJ doing? What are the transitions like? What does he choose to play next? How does he keep the crowd happy? And I was standing there, and suddenly JD Plastic Dreams comes on. It just goes over like 8, 9 minutes, and it's just this beauty. I mean, I've heard electronic music before, obviously, but in that moment, in that club environment, it just totally struck me as like, wow, this is my next step. This is what I want to do. As a DJ, you always try to create a certain vibe that people would not leave the dance floor. But obviously, with the music that you chose to play, I can't play music that I don't like personally. It just doesn't work. I would turn around and leave. It just doesn't go that way. You kind of have to get a good idea about the crowd. How much can you push them? Also, what do you have to give them to keep them happy? Something that they still know, and that you're still okay with playing. But at that moment where I heard Plastic Dreams by JD, I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is it. This is where I want to go. And then there was a transition period between 92 and 93 where I put in more and more, let's say, techno records, but not only techno records, also a lot of house stuff. Stricter Rhythm was very big these days. I'm not really coming from a harder techno perspective even. My first label was called Soap Records with some friends together, and it was a house label. I really loved that, and because you could create a certain sound carpet, I would call it, and it makes sense in German, that word, a wall of sound which is inescapable. My goal was always like after half an hour that they would be still on the dance floor. It's like, when is this track over? It's like constantly changing. And techno or electronic music, house and techno made that possible.
Right. And that was totally like magic back then because people didn't have this real awareness of what DJs were doing. It was a total mystery to like the average person that was going to a club.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, also, that's not really a job, right? Like, what do you actually do? Like, what do you want to do for a living one day?
Did you have a sense early on that this actually was a job or like a thing that you could do for a living? Or how long were you DJing before you thought, okay, this is like my life now, I'm not doing something else?
Maybe 97, 98, where I had the first time the idea, not that this is going to be my life, I'm going to do that. It was rather the other way around. It's like, I don't think I can do anything else. I'm stuck with this now, And people kept telling me, it's like, but what do you want to do in 15 years? What do you want to do in 15 years when this is all over? Because it was just there was no precedence. There was no one around really who was DJing for 50 or 60 years, And the idea was just not there. And that was kind of intimidating. It was always a little bit like, oh, yeah, this person is actually right. But then again, the power of the music and being drawn to techno just made you, I'll think about that next year. And then you just continue and you continue and you continue. The way I got into techno, I have to explain that a little bit. I was playing in this club, this small town outside of Frankfurt, and I did this Thursday nights there, and they were pretty successful with like all sorts of music, student club, I started to play more and more house and techno, but it was just not really like what the people wanted to hear. And the owner at some point told me, is like, he was old and he was like, oh, you know what, I'm just tired of running this club and you're playing all this new music. Why don't you take over? Just rename the place. It was a small place, just maybe 300 people max, I went to university at that point, not knowing what I was doing. And I was like, all right, I'll run a club with no business background, nothing at all. I knew that I needed to basically create my own club in order to book myself as a DJ, because no one else would book me as a techno DJ. There was already like loads of techno DJs out there at that time in 94, 93, especially in the hometown where I come from. There's a lot of like famous names where I come from. One of our friends who sadly passed away during the pandemic, Pascal Feos, came from there. Heiko MSO, Heiko Laux, Johannes Heil, quite a famous producer, Toni Rios, Frank Lorber. Everyone came from this area for some reason, and everyone got in towards the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, pretty big in the Frankfurt club scene. Techno became more and more popular, and more dedicated techno clubs opened up, especially on countrysides, Like you were driving to like this little farmer's village 20 minutes out, and there would be this random club playing super techno on a Thursday night. So I knew I wouldn't have a chance to get bookings like this. So this opportunity came, and I was like, I didn't know what I wanted to do anyways. Let's just run a club now. And I opened it, and I booked myself as a Saturday night DJ. And I remember that like the first nights I even started with acid jazz, people coming in. I love to create those long sets where you just give the people a good mood when they come in. They can move a little bit, groove a little bit, and then it gets harder and it gets like more of a journey later on and full on at the peak time of the night. And that's how I basically made myself a name as a techno DJ in a certain way. On a business side of things, I have to mention that I completely failed. I knew so many people in the area and people who came to the club. So when I was behind the bar, everybody was drinking for free. When I was at the door, everybody came in for free. So after a year and about 2 months, the bank would be like, no, we're not going to give you any money anymore. You're broke. You have a lot of money in debt with us. So I had to close down. And that was in 95, middle of 95. And that's where I had to make the decision. It was kind of the first decision. Am I going to continue in that music scene, randomly see what happens, or am I just going to pursue some normal, regular career? And exactly at that point, Sven Feth had this label called IQ Hard House in Offenbach. And Frankfurt was really big, and Frankfurt sound, Snap, all that stuff, all came out of Frankfurt. And also techno-wise, it was quite a big town in Europe. Frankfurt was known for its techno. Not anymore today. Everybody moved to Berlin, but back then it was. And they were looking for someone at the label who was able to speak English. I spent a year as an exchange student. I was like, I knew some people I booked some of those DJs also to my club, and they were like, yeah, just come and work for us. And that's how I basically decided to go into the music scene by working for a label.
Was there a sound that kind of developed that, or certain records that people gravitated towards more so in that area?
For us, it was more like a mix of those house records, because we had a distribution just between Frankfurt and Gießen. Actually, was a distribution called Discomania. It was pretty famous at that time, and they had a guy working there who was just constantly flying over to New York to get the latest records. So we loved the Morals grooves on Strictly Rhythm, and especially I always have been a big DJ Pierre fan. His wild pitch style is extremely influential in whatever I do still today. But also we had, and that might sound weird, but the good old trance. But it was really good old trance. When you listen to records today, if somebody's on Spotify, go on Spotify. I have some radio shows where I have a selection of tracks that were very influential in the 90s for me. And for example, there's like Lazenby, Sacred Circles, and that type of music, which was very impactful, very emotional. And we had the right clubs to play in as well, and to experience and those kind of music, like epic tracks, which are like 10 minutes long and just put you through so many emotions and uplifting and melancholic and all that. And actually, IQ Records was one of the leading brands back in the days as well for this kind of music. Like if you go into the IQ catalog and listen to Signal 6, Icon, Café Del Mar was originally released on IQ. Everybody knows Café Del Mar. It's absolutely mind-blowing what came out and what was created in that area, basically.
You're talking about IQ, which is Sven Feth, and obviously he was super influential, especially in like that era of electronic music from Germany. Obviously, Sven Feth was affiliated to this club that you played at as well, called the Omen.
Sven was partly owner of the Omen Club, and it was funny because the Omen, I think, opened in 1990 and it closed down in October of 98. I never went to the Omen before 95. At the point where I was really interested in techno, a lot of my friends always drove to Frankfurt to go to the Omen Club. There was other clubs, of course, Dorian Gray in Frankfurt, a big one, Music Hall in Frankfurt. Frankfurt was huge when it comes to this, but Omen was outstanding next to Dorian Gray because it was just this club in the airport, which was pretty insane. And Berlin had Tresor and E-Work, there was the famous places. That was like the center of the universe for techno. I would almost say in Europe. Of course, some people from London and England would not agree to this, and I see that. I mean, Manchester and London was really big, and they had their clubs as well, obviously, But we were kind of like, let's say, center of Europe here, not the island of England. Sorry, English people. And it was in '95 when I was working for IQ Hard House that I was sitting in my office, and Klaus Goodgroove, a DJ called Goodgroove, sadly passed away many years ago also, came into my office. He was one of the A&Rs at Hard House, and he was like, "Oh, I have my night tonight at the Omen Club, and my partner Pauli, there would always a DJ duo. He's kind of sick, and those nights are long." And I asked everyone, and no one was able to join me tonight because everybody was playing somewhere. And he looked at me and said, "You're a techno DJ, right? Would you come in tonight and just play the beginning?" And I was like, "Sure, of course." And at that point, I've never been to the club. So I started playing, and it was the first time I experienced really this club from the inside, and it was just absolutely incredible. Somehow I wasn't nervous. I don't know why I wasn't nervous, because I was never there. I had no idea what everybody else was playing, especially Sven. I always was kind of on my own path. I wasn't really looking left and right what others were doing. You were looking at charts that were printed, like what's your top 10 records, what's this guy playing. And I think that was to my advantage, because I came in and I just, all right, I'll just play here, not knowing how many people would be in front of me who would give their right arm to be able to play there. The club held about 1,000 people, I would say, maybe a little bit more. It had a lot of blacklight drawings on the wall, so it was kind of psychedelic. At that time, it had an awesome sound system. The DJ booth was in the corner, the dance floor right in front of you. It was perfectly laid out, the bars to the left, and there was no closing hours. So it was just like it opened at 11 at night, and it would close whenever the last person leaves, like at 11 in the morning, at 2 in the morning, It was Frankfurt. It was kind of wild, and it was in the middle of Frankfurt, and it was really special. It was really so different. You knew that people came together there from anywhere. They were driving 200 kilometers on a weekend to go there for the whole weekend, essentially. Yeah, and so I started playing, and around 1, Klaus showed up, and he was like standing behind me. He was like, "Yeah, you're doing okay. You know what? I'll play till 11 in the morning anyways. Just keep going for a little bit longer." So I ended up playing till 4 or 5 or something. It was an awesome night, and first time I really realized where I'm at and what I'm doing here. And then I walked down to the office, and the guys were looking at me. He's like, "Hey, we heard you did quite well, and how about you give us your number, and we might call you back if somebody's missing." And so I was already called back the next weekend, because there was always somebody missing. It was not yet the case. Of course, you had guest DJs bookings. You had people from England coming over, the Advent was playing, or like Neil Lundstrom would be playing, Luke Slater came in, but it was not on a regular basis. So the residents had their nights. On a Friday night was usually for Sven Feth. That was his night. Unless he had a booking somewhere else, then basically others were playing. And on a Saturday night, it was more of a trancy night. It was DJ Duck, who was very, very big at that time. It was huge. There was like lines outside the door. It was insane. Everything was so new. It's so hard to explain. It was so new to everyone. Hearing that sound that you never heard on the radio anywhere before. You go in this club, it's this huge bass, lights, and it just, anything goes, and you're just like partying in there. I ended up becoming a resident DJ from 95 until the very last day in 98. If I may do some advertising, Owl Arts is a company in Barcelona, and they did some masterclass with me. But while we did it, we were talking about these old times, and I told them about have some stuff in my basement. They were like, "Hey, let's do a quick documentary. It's like, you can watch it. Go online, find it somewhere. It's called Unboxing Memories or something like this. If you want to know more and see actually some footage of how the people looked and how they were behaving, because on the closing night, the street was closed down on the outside. You see Sven dancing on the speakers outside. It just gives me goosebumps just talking about it."
This experience of going to a club and having a resident DJ who plays for the entire night, start to finish, is so rare nowadays. It almost doesn't exist. Not that you can't go see a DJ for 8 hours or whatever, but it's so rare that the same person would be doing that every Saturday night at this club. Do you feel like that was some sort of DJ school for you, or a training ground that influences even how you DJ now? Or
you took the word right out of my mouth. I always talk about these Omen days, these 3 years where I played at the Omen as my DJ school. You had the light jockey was actually a very influential guy. Yeah, the light jockey was standing to the right of you, and he was sometimes very intimidating. One of the main guys was Michael, and I remember the first couple of times that I was playing there, he was always looking at me. He's like, "Huh, you got to prove yourself because otherwise we're going to kick you out here." And he always had his rule, around like 12:30. You started at 11, so we build it up slowly. The doors open, people are coming in. You're not playing like bam, bam, bam. You just like build it up slowly and play some slow grooves so people are just like moving around. Maybe there's like 2-3 people already on the dance floor and doing some obscure dances. But around 12:30, it was like, all right, I'm going to lower the lights now. You better play something to tell the people this is the start of the night. But obviously, you should not do it too big because you wanted to follow up and build up the night still after that point. So you always had to find a good moment and a good, it was kind of around that time. And then you would log over to the light change. It's like, I got it now. Now, lower the lights. And now I'm going to turn up the volume a little bit. You learned how to deal not only playing the music, you learned also how to deal with the sound system, the volume of the sound system, to basically give the people the right direction to what's happening now. This is happening now, and you've learned that. You've learned to really feel the moment. What's appropriate to do now? What's inappropriate to do now? What's going to throw me off maybe later? And not only that, sometimes you had obviously guest DJs booked, famous guest DJs. For example, I mentioned before, Luke Slater would come in, but he would only play maybe 2 hours. He would play from 2 to 4. So you build up for him till 2. So he would have the spotlight, You were just basically playing music to keep the people entertained and having fun on the dance floor. But you would stay away from the huge hits and anything because you wanted to have the guest DJ to have the huge impact. And then once he's done, you could take over, and then you were allowed to do anything, and you were allowed to go through journeys towards the end, Like at 6, you might go a little bit obscure. At 7, you would go a little bit more trancey. At 8, you would go like put out the hammer one more time. And I mean, it's so unique, and you're totally right. It's like, it's so rare these days that there's even places where DJs could do this. At various clubs, which I know, I sometimes ask if I can play the whole night. And it's sometimes really weird for people who are coming in, he's already playing? What's going on? Yeah, it's not about me. It's about creating that night for you so you have a great time. Like, forget about me here. I'm just the DJ, and that was basically what was happening back then. People came for the music. They obviously came for the DJ because they knew that this DJ would play a good music. But once they were in, they were concentrating on the music. And they were not standing in front of the DJ and said like, oh, he's a cool guy. They would be rather like, tonight you were shit, Tonight you didn't play good.
What is your actual favorite length of DJ set to do in general?
3 hours is always a good time to give the people a really good idea of what you can do. And then it's okay. It's okay to stop and say like, next time I'll come and you can have the next 3 hours, 3 hours I find a really, really nice time. When it comes to festivals, I think 2 hours is a good time. I mean, in some rare cases, 90 minutes is even good. But then you want to hear the next DJ. What is the next DJ going to do? What's next? That's a whole different concept. It's a whole different philosophy. But in a club, which has a kind of an intimate vibe, I think, maybe I stretch it to 3 to 4 hours.
I feel like every different genre in electronic music has like different conventions about how long the DJs play for. And I think people look at like even house and techno as this monolith, but actually there's so many little specifics within that and so many little scenes within that.
There's regional differences as well. And that was the interesting thing. English DJs back in those days were only used to play 2 hours. Like if we booked English DJs to the Omen, where we basically offered them like, you can play 4 or 5 hours, they were like, huh? No, we're only playing 2 hours, because it was really interesting in England at that time. a DJ would have maybe 5 DJ gigs a night. They would be playing an hour here, and then they drive with a car to Manchester and play an hour there, and then they'll drive over to Leeds and play an hour there, and it's just like the whole night. So everybody was just used to play that short. But yet again, in New York, for example, when you look at people like Danny Talapia, it's like, what? I'm only playing 12 hours tonight? In Germany, it was always like long sets. That was the thing.
I think there was like a Frankfurt sound at some point and probably like a Berlin sound going on, at least in the mid 90s. How did it feel when you would go to these clubs in Berlin? Like, did it feel like the people were different, or the sound was different, or the vibe was different over there?
Oh yeah, totally. There was let's say, a friendly competition going on between Frankfurt and Berlin over a long time. I mean, ultimately, I have to admit, Berlin won, but in the 90s, exactly the time period that you just mentioned, it was really that we had so many strong labels in Frankfurt. Overdrive Records, as I mentioned already, IQ Hardhouse, there's PCP, there's so much stuff that came around Frankfurt. We had our sort of own identity. But then you were looking in Berlin, and they had their own thing going. There were labels like Low Spirit, for example, which was a whole different thing. It was more based on kind of raves, because Low Spirit was behind all the Mayday festivals and everything. One of the famous labels in Berlin, which I can't remember the name right now, Marmion Schönefeld was one of their biggest tracks. They had their own identity as well. Mike van Dijk was behind that.
Is it Superstition?
Superstition, thank you. Yes, Superstition. And every year during Love Parade, it came to the clash, like the Frankfurt truck and the Berlin trucks, and who had the louder sound system. And we were like making noise for us in Frankfurt, this is Frankfurt. Although I never really felt like I was really a big part of that Frankfurt sound, because I was always kind of like this person sort of standing next to it. I was never really belonging 100% to this, which was a little weird back in the days. But in today's world, I think it also taught me to kind of go my own way a little bit more. But the good thing, because I mentioned it was a friendly competition going on, because we also had like DJ exchange programs. So the resident DJs of Tresor would play a complete night at the Omen, and vice versa. And that actually that got me my residency at Tresor that I had at the old Tresor, because I started playing on a monthly basis there at some point. Because I was not really considered one of these Frankfurt guys. They kind of liked me at Tresor, and I was like, yeah, you just keep coming back. It's cool, That was another DJ school, obviously, for me, the Tresor Club. And I don't know how extremely thankful I am that I was able to play in those two clubs for such a long time.
For people who aren't aware, the old Tresor Club in Berlin was in a disused bank, and it had like the bank vault and everything. And there's this great moment in that video that you mentioned that Aulart did, where you're talking about playing all night at Tresor, and you said that was the moment that you felt like you really understood what techno was about. At that moment for you, what was techno about?
Yeah, you phrased this really nicely, because I wanted always to correct myself in this. You never really know what techno is about. You never really understand fully the scope of techno. And who am I to basically claim I understood it? I didn't know. But you said it right. Exactly in that moment was a whole night down there. It was, you walk out of this thing and you just stand there and you look at the sun and you look at that. So it's just like, what the hell did I just experience down there? It was a completely different world. It was down in the basement. It was foggy. It was just stroboscope. There was a huge lack of oxygen, relentless kick drums, hi-hats flying around your ear, and people are just smiling and having the best time ever. And I'm from this little village, walking out of this. It's like, I get it. I get it in this moment. This is just so unique. This is so unifying. Part of the special Berlin culture as well, because when the wall fell, let's say 90, 89, 90, and techno became big at the same time. So there was suddenly all these left behind venues, especially in East Berlin, old factory places, and just people went in, put up a sound system, and what kind of music are we going to be playing here? Let's play techno. And it was this music that where people came in from the East, from the West. And it was the only place where people would not ask each other, are you from the East? Are you from the West? Nobody gave a shit. It was just didn't matter. And it made this sense of unity. We're experiencing something here together. There was never any fights. There was never anything going on. Techno was so peaceful. Still is, I feel. But especially in Berlin, you still have that vibe somehow. You're not judged. You go into this club, you're not judged. Once you're in there, just as long as you're respectful to everyone else, just do your thing, and that's Berlin, and that's still today, that's still the case. And it just gives this sense of unity and togetherness, which is very unique.
So I guess this relentless kick drum was pretty important to your label Audio, which came a little bit after Soap. At that point of time when you were running Audio, what kind of tracks were you really into? And also, who were some of the people that label put you in touch with from like around the world?
Yeah, I was always very focused on kick drums. That's kind of my thing, kick drums. I always want to have the best possible kick and bass relation in a track. And I was totally obsessed with that. I don't know how many years by now I spent in front of a mixing desk just trying to get the kick drum right. But it's a fun experience in itself, even if you're not successful. And the other thing I would say is the groove and the rhythm. And I think I'm mostly inspired by things like wild pitch style from DJ Pierre, ass shaking, kind of sexy rhythm, but yet relentless and forward and hard in a way. You have this groove and you cannot escape this groove, and it just keeps on going, it keeps on building. And then you have those synths building up on top of it, and that was what I was looking for this label, absolutely. I never really liked the techno, which seemed to me a little bit soulless, which was too straight, too mechanical. I always felt like there's got to be a little bit of humanizing swing in it and something like this. And one of the first people with this label that internationally I got in touch with was definitely the Advent. Colin McBean and Cisco Ferrara. I was the biggest fan of them. When I was playing in the Omen, they had an exchange program with a club in England. And the night I was playing there in this club, the Advent did a live act there right after I was doing my DJ set. And I was like, oh my God, I'm the biggest The Advent fan, and I get to play in front of them. And that was the night where I was just hung around, and I dared to talk to them later on. They were super, super nice. And, pre-mobile phones, pre-email time, they were like giving me the phone number of their studio. So 2 days later, I was hanging on London a little bit longer. I was just like dialing this number. Yeah, Cisco here. Hey, it's Chris. Are you in the studio? Yeah, can I maybe swing by? And then I visited the Advent in the studio, and that was kind of the first moment where I was like, wow, this is like, you make connections, you meet your heroes, they teach you new things. It's just awesome. Yeah, and after a while I was asking them, would you do a production for me, for my label? But they were not allowed, or they didn't want to give me the Advent name. So if anybody looks for this record, it was the Audio 8, and it was called Red Eye. This is how I got in touch with Adam Bayer back in the days, basically before I started his label Drum Code, which I was a huge fan of, and also Marco Carola and Gaetano Parisio, Steve Rahmat. It just became this group of friends then in the beginning of the 2000s who were inspiring each other and just made music.
It's interesting too, because I feel like that music of that time, or like late 90s, early 2000s in techno, is going through a total renaissance at the moment. Like people are playing these old Advent records, the first Adam Bayer and Drum Code records, your Audio records. Like, don't you think it's having a whole moment again?
Oh, totally. It has a whole moment again, and I actually love it. I totally enjoy it. And I restarted CLR now, and I have my release coming up in January, my techno release. I have to put it this way. I put it a little back because of my album. I was sitting here. I was actually made it here where I'm sitting right now. And I remember I was just like, you know what? you're just going to use exactly all these machines you had at hand back in the 90s. You're not going to do anything fancy. You're just like, you're going to roll the 909 with toms and shit. You have the 303 running, you have some effects going, and I even sampled some old Stigmata records. It's a renaissance in a way, but on another level. It sounds so much better these days because our production quality has increased. At least I hope over the past 20 years that we've learned something. It's so much about the details with this music. It's so much about the little details. How is the big kick tuned towards the bass? What feeling does this give you? Where does the hi-hat come in? Where does it go out? How is it programmed? And I know this now. I didn't know this 20 years ago. I just did stuff. And now I'm a little bit more aware. You can manipulate it even better now. You can make it sound better. You can twist it. So I'm really, really happy with that release. It's going to be called Mindbender. And there's going to be actually a Planetary Salt System remix on this one too. You're totally right. There's the total renaissance, but in a good way. And it's not as fast, I would say. Back then we had to make up lack of sound impact. We had to make up with speed. So we were playing around 144 because, the sound systems wouldn't have this impact. And I feel now we can do it fast still, 135, 138, but it's a little bit more, you have more space between the kick drums. You can put a little bit more soul into it.
You think it's because like the sound systems are different, that the records were produced differently in a way?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm completely alone with this theory, but I always felt like this. I always felt like if we wanted to increase the energy level in the club and it was lacking by the sound system, we just sped up things somehow.
Techno really is the music of technology to me. It wouldn't be possible without new technologies that were invented. And like every time new sonic technologies happen, it's like often people in techno that are exploring, well, what if we play with this EQ, or like mastering got better, so now like we can make this mastered even crazier. It kind of like fulfilled its promise.
Oh, I totally agree. You can produce sounds now that literally fly through your head. 20 years ago, you were trying to get this somehow going, but now you can literally like work with certain plugins and with certain sound aesthetics. And of course, we've learned a lot too during all these years in producing this kind of music. And I still feel like there's so much still to explore. Even if you only have a kick drum and a hi-hat running, there's so much in the middle of it to explore and to work on and to make it even more impactful. It's never ending. That's what I think the beauty and the secret of it is, that it's still or even more popular than ever in the world.
At this point, you've played all the biggest clubs and festivals in the world. I don't know if you still get nervous ever, but I think younger DJs coming up, even people who are big DJs now, get nervous like all the time. What advice do you give to DJs that get nervous on how they can be less nervous, or what they can prepare so that if everything is going haywire, they can still like keep it together on stage?
I can give you some advice, but I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because you put me in a room in front of 50 people and I'm supposed to say something, I shit my pants. I'm so nervous. You put me with my equipment in front of 5,000 people, I don't ever get nervous. And that's really the only aspect of my life where I have that. I have such a confidence in this that I can be like, all right, I'll handle this. I handle this. Funny enough, 2 days ago, I had to do a quick BBC World appearance. BBC World just called up and said, like, we have this little short thing about Berlin clubs and the UNESCO. Everybody in Berlin clubs and DJs in Berlin work now that the UNESCO basically puts the cultural heritage protection for the clubs, so they get funding and they continue to exist. It was only 3 minutes, and I was so nervous. I was so freaking nervous, and I was just imagining myself like, let's just put a mixing desk in front of you. Maybe not more nervous anymore. But how can you be less nervous? Preparing much better. Be prepared. You can end up in lucky moments, but they're only going to be lucky in hindsight if you were prepared in that moment. And I have to say, I got into lucky moments, like I explained. I got asked at the right time to play at the right place, but at that moment I was prepared. I knew that I would be walking into with my record case, and I knew I know what I'm doing. So you can use this moment for yourself. So preparation is absolute key. Know your music. You can at least like take a deep breath and lean back and say like, there's no reason to be nervous. I know my music. I know what I'm doing. I know my knobs. I know what they're doing. I know my instrument. I would call the mixing desk that you work with your instrument. Do you know your instrument? If you don't know your instrument, then you have a really big reason to be nervous. With my very first gig, I actually made a list of records that I would play. So I was like, if I'm so nervous that I can't think of the next record, I would at least have this list under the turntable. I've never used that list, funny enough, on my first gig, but it was good to have it there. It just gave me a peace of mind. So I think if you really good, well prepared, you might still be nervous, obviously, because it's a new situation you get thrown into. But all the factors that you can control, you should be able to control to your favor, and all the rest will follow. You cannot be on top of everything. If I don't know, a turntable fails, a CDJ fails, or the sound system fails, that can happen. It's not under your, but there's no reason for you to be nervous about that.
I think the interesting thing about DJing is like that you're in so many different environments and so many different states. Sometimes it's really amazing. Sometimes the energy is super weird. Sometimes somebody's standing in front of you and refuses to dance and like is just, like looking at you, like grilling you for your whole set. Sometimes you're on a giant stage with thousands of people. Sometimes you're on the floor in a room with 50 people trying to read the energy of all of these different situations. I think is a big learning curve.
Just be you. It's like, I cannot control these people around me. I can control the situation that's going on. I cannot make that person that frowns at you all the time happy. Be with yourself and just do your thing as good as you can, and the rest, which is not under your control, don't worry about that.
Zen and the Art of DJing with Chris Liebing. So you've been to I don't know how many thousands of events by this point. What do you consider one of the wildest parties that you have ever been to, or the wildest thing that you have ever seen in a party?
Definitely my gigs at Berghain. Berghain is like, it's how do you say it? It's so obvious to mention this, but it's got its reputation for a reason. Anything can happen. At some point, you look over and you just have this naked crowd in front of you on the right side dancing, completely naked people. And you're just like, all right, fine. And when you would go towards the end of the room, like, who knows what these people are doing there in this moment, It's like anything goes, all right. And if you get all these people...
Yeah, they're like fisting and eating ice cream at the same time or something.
Absolutely. And it's just completely normal. There's a whole different world in there. You sometimes think you play at Berghain, you can just play whatever you want. The people who are in there are so happy to be in there that they're going to have a good time no matter what. And it's not really like that. The people who are in there, they want to experience something really extraordinary. So they're expecting something different to happen, If you manage as a DJ to sort of get the people on a journey, you give them the feeling, hey, we're doing this together here. We are here in this room right now in this city, which has a historical background like no other. And this is all that matters right now. And if you're at that point, it's just the best feeling in the world you can have while you're playing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, people are really there to feel extreme feelings. So they're willing to go there with you.
Absolutely. And literally lose control. Literally let go of any ideas that you have and just let the moment take over. And somehow you find yourself on the dance floor 8 hours later still. And you're just like, what happened? What just happened? Why am I still here? Why am I not at work? It's Monday morning. let the universe take over control. And that is, I think, something that can't be taught enough.
That's kind of like your DJ philosophy, right? I've read several interviews with you where you talk a lot about spinning such a web or making something so hypnotic that people sort of forget where they
And I
are
forget.
and what they're doing.
And not only the people, me too. Like that, I'm just at some point standing there. What's actually running here? What faders are up? What's going on? And you just automatically come up with whatever you want to put on next, and it's just automatically happening. And that's the point where you want to get into, where something else takes control over the people on the dance floor and over you. And it's just like, we're all in this together, but I'm just the facilitator right now. Yeah, I'm watching my own hands just move this fader up and down right now. Yeah, and it's just working. That's why I come back to the technology stuff. The better you know your equipment, the better you know your instrument, the easier you can let go, and you don't have to think about the next movement.
For people who have not seen you DJ or haven't looked at what you're doing, you're also not just using two CDJs with some USBs. Like, you have a crazy setup with Tractor where you're like operating multiple channels at the same time and effects. And you've actually chosen a route where it's a lot more complex and layered and technology focused than just like, I plugged in my USB to these CDJs and like mix one record into the other, one wave file into the other MP3, whatever.
Which is great too. I admire those DJs who do that, and it's just magic what comes out of the speaker. And apparently I'm not one of them. So I need all that technology to help me. Right now, or for a while now, six channels in front of you, where every channel is constantly doing something different. Like something different is running, and it's just like, if I put this channel a little bit more, if I take a little bit more bass in this channel, and it's all going to be different again. And I need all that technology to help me to create that. I would never really underestimate, for example, Sven Fade, who's using two turntables and a mixing desk, and he creates magic with this. It's incredible. It's like, wow. And I think I went that route because I wasn't able of doing what can be done only with two channels.
For years, you're known as Chris Liebing, CLR Recordings, king of the kickdrum. I mean, you still are. But in your last two full-length albums, Burn Slow and this one that just came out in November called Another Day, I think people are getting to see like a real different side of you, and you exploring like musical palette that is not purely based on like this peak time dynamics of techno. What was the process of making Another Day like, and how was it different from what you did with Burn Slow?
First of all, I would say, I've learned not to forget where you're coming from. And as much as I love techno, and as much as this is my life, and what we just discussed, how incredible these moments are that you hypnotic over hours going on relentlessly. It's also in me that I'm a kid from the 80s. I grew up in the 80s with a lot of 80s music, and I we're both huge Depeche Mode fans, and obviously that's not because of some techno music. It's because there's amazing songs, there's amazing melodies, there's like such a depth in some certain songwriters, especially Martin Gore is one of the best ones, I think. There's so much amazing music that I grew up with that I always had in me. I love listening music. Radiohead, Massive Attack, Boards of Canada, all these things. It's just like, I love that music. At some point I was like, why am I not trying to make it? Oh, because I can't play an instrument. And I guess that's why I ended up with techno music, because it was just kind of almost like a punk attitude. You just hit some buttons, something comes out. Let's organize what's coming out a little bit and make it danceable. You were learning while you're doing it. it doesn't help so much if you want to create music which is a little bit more complex with a little bit more melodic bass, and that was my idea with Burn Slow and also with Another Day Now. And I knew I could not do this alone. And then I found Ralf Hildenbeutel. And I didn't have to look for long. I knew Ralf Hildenbeutel, and that's where we kind of go full circle now back to the early days of IQ. Ralf Hildenbeutel was the producer of Sven Väth's first three albums, and also the Barbarella album, which was really, 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 really big back in those days. And Ralf was also one of the main three producers behind the label IQ, who created all that techno that got me into techno. And I met him first time in '95 when I worked for the IQ label. He was one of those three mysterious producers at the back of the alley in our office. There was the three studios at the end of the room, and sometimes you would come by. It's like, oh, this is Ralf. These are the producers. And in 2015, I was like, Ralf, I want to do a little bit more musical stuff. Would you help me? He's like, yeah, okay. And so we did the Burn Slow album. My idea behind it was, let's create an album that I want to listen to in an airplane when I'm stoned. and it's just like, why an airplane? I have no idea, because I spent so much time in an airplane. I don't know, because it's a confined environment where you can't leave. You just put your headphones on, you just sit there. And telling a story with this, and it was a great experience. It was awesome. It was such a great experience to be with Ralf in the studio and to work on this album. And beginning of 2018, 19, I was always knocking on Ralf's door. It's like, Ralf, you want to start the next one? I'm just like, I have these ideas. Can we start the next one? With Burn Slow, I still felt like I cannot have anybody sing on this record. So it's just have to stick to spoken word. And for the next one, I was like, just fuck it all. Who cares? It's like, my let's say techno, the people who follow me on techno, they dismiss this album as like, what does he do? But it doesn't really affect their idea about me too much, because I still play my techno. But with Another Day, I was just like, all that, forget about it. Whatever you go into the studio, you just create now. Don't think too much about it. So I basically took the lesson I wanted to teach with Burn Slow, like meditate, be in the moment, and I took that lesson to myself, and I said, like, Ralf, I'm going to come to the studio, I have this idea in my head, and the rest is just whatever happens in the studio on that day. And this is how the whole album came about. There was not much thinking involved. It was just like, all right, now we do this. Oh, I have this. I just came over here with my bike and had the headphones on, and I was listening to this Massive Attack track. Like, I really like that drumming sequence in there. Let's use this. Let's recreate that drumming sequence and see what comes out of it. A little spoiler alert, that was Cause and Effect, the track. If you listen to the drumming sequence, it's exactly the same drumming sequence of Unfinished Sympathy of Massive Attack, one of my all-time favorite tracks. Again, we were just talking about losing control. Let something else take over the control. Like, don't try to over control it. And this time I was just like, maybe you call it lazy too. I was just like, you know what, guys, here's the instrumentals. Write some lyrics and sing them, or talk them. Do whatever you feel like. Just send it over when you're done. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you like how it should sound. I trust you guys. There was not one moment where I had to send someone back and say like, oh, I don't really like that. Everything that came in was like, which even made me think I was not even working anymore at some point. They all wrote their lyrics during the pandemic, and they all recorded their lyrics during the pandemic. And so the album was finalized November 2020. I had the masters already like in January beginning of this year. So the album was already done. That was kind of the hardest time. It was just, I had to be so patient. I had this album there, and I could not really tell anyone about it. I could not really play anything to anyone. It was just like, oh my God, I want everybody to hear it. And then the release date came, and then I was like, oh, can we move the release date? I actually liked the period that I was in, having that in front of you. I have to say, I'm so extremely happy with this album. I listen to it now, and I would not change any note in it.
You mentioned Daniel Miller, who, of course, is an icon, started Mute Records, signed Depeche Mode.
Have we mentioned that? Cheers.
If you're listening to this, Chris has a Depeche Mode coffee mug, and I am wearing a Depeche Mode Violator sweater. By the way, what's your favorite Depeche Mode song?
It's hard to pick one, but one of them, the first one that always comes to mind is Stripped, because it has this absolutely intense, most incredible melody, or would you say chord structure, that anyone could have ever invented. When the comes in, I'm just I could die. What's your favorite Depeche Mode album, if I can continue this excursion here?
Oh, I feel like the ones that I have spent probably the most time with are 101 and Violator, but I also really love the early stuff. I mean, Black Celebration is probably the best one. But the way that Violator is constructed as an album from beginning to end is perfect to me. Anyway, I wanted to ask you about Daniel Miller before we get out of here.
Please.
So Daniel Miller, just iconic figure in music, creates Mute Records, has signed so many interesting different acts, and has had a really big impact, I would say, on electronic music. You have had the pleasure of hanging out with him and are releasing on the Mute label. And I know that you guys have spent a good amount of time together by now. What are some things that he has said to you, or any wisdom that he has imparted to you, or anything that you learned from watching the way he works that has made an impact on you?
It's a big question, because this man is just one of its kind. First of all, he's the most humble person I've ever met, considering what he's created, considering how much impact he had on so many generations of us, of music lovers. Two things on the top of that list, what I've learned of him. One is limitation is the key, and that really helped me a lot, especially in producing music. Because he always loves to tell the story then how he produced Mom Leather Red, and that he only had a 4-track recorder. He's a very strong believer, if you limit yourself, you need to be more creative in order to create something out there. And also, you're forced to do this, because if you don't limit yourself, you get lost in all the possibilities you have, especially producing techno music, or maybe even any kind of music. Just making decisions, make a decision. Do I like this? Yes, keep it. Do I maybe like it? Just bin it. I like that approach. And so I force myself sometimes to sit here and say, like, okay, I'm only using, for example, here the 101 or the 909. And that's my focus. And it's really helpful. His approach to deal with this ever more complex world. You could easily get overwhelmed by the amount of emails you're having, the amount of messages you're getting, the amount of people who want your opinion about this track and this track. And I was always amazed that he's so centered and so balanced, and doesn't seem to be heavily affected by all these 10,000 people who sent him music. They are all expecting an answer. It freaked me out, honestly, in the past 20 years. It's like running a label. You get demos by friends, and the friends, they want to have at some point an opinion. It's like, do you want to release my track or not? But you're not always in the mood to listen to it, or maybe you just put it to the side. I listen to it maybe next week, and then it gets a little forgotten. But it's always behind in your head, and it just drives you nuts. And I still haven't answered this email. And he's just like, if it's really important, it comes back to you. Even in the aspect of finding music for DJing, you could go on so many different platforms now, hardwax.com, even if you're sitting somewhere in the mountains like I am now, Beatport, Juno, TrackSource, and you're just like, and then obviously you have all the promos sent, And I was always under the impression I have to go through everything all the time, and it just drives you nuts. Oh, I haven't checked that yet. I haven't checked yet that. And it just completely takes over, and you lose the focus, and you end up with nothing in the end, in the worst case scenario. I was asking, it's like, don't you feel like sometimes you've missed out on this huge opportunity to release this big record by a producer who sent you this demo, but you were just not listening to it? And he's like, well, if that happened, then I hope he'd release it on another great label that maybe was even better for him. I think he learned from a very early age that he cannot be on top of everything. Be okay also with people who maybe think bad of you. And now I even listen to my promos. I have this huge promo folder on my email account, and I tap into it when I feel it.
I think you've answered it, but one of my questions I wanted to ask you was like, if you ever get bogged down or depressed by like the business of techno. You just get into this because it's fun and you love to do it. But really, to have this long career in this business requires that you do a lot of business, and there's a lot of like weird politics and managers and agents and like this and that, and I think it like can kill a lot of people or like kill their career because they're just like, this is too stressful.
Yeah. In a way, in today's internet, especially with social media, what most people don't even realize, and what took me a long time to realize, you create your own environment. You create the environment that you're in. The moment you open Twitter, the moment you open Instagram, what you see is what you essentially at some point chose to see, because you are following that account, whatever that is. It's a news account, it's another DJ, it's a musician or anything. I like social media. I don't condemn it, but I think we have to learn how to use it. And I decided at some point in my life that I am not even following DJ friends of mine anymore, because no matter how happy you are with what you're doing, you fall into this trap to compare yourself. With the DJ friends that I have personal contact. We send messages, we talk on the phone. I don't really necessarily need to follow their Instagram account and see a flyer of a party where I see other DJs play. I'm thinking of why I'm not playing there. There's reasons why you're not playing there. Stop thinking about this, And by not following it anymore, I'm not even getting in that situation anymore. And especially also on Twitter, it's like, just stop following those accounts that make you angry. Every time you go online now and you see a post and you're like angry about this or so, in that moment, unfollow that account. And it makes life so much better. It makes life so much better, I tell you. You maybe know less about the world, what's going on out there, but you don't need to know all that stuff. Work on music. That's even way more important.
My final question is, how has the experience of making Another Day played into your DJ sets or any of the new music you're making? Or is there something that you carried with you from that experience that's kind of impacting this other side of your music making and playing?
I mean, the biggest challenge that I have is to bring these two worlds a little bit more together. Ralph and I were able to create a certain vibe and atmosphere on this album. And now my challenge is to transfer this on the dance floor somehow. This is what I'm basically working on right now. I want to do a live act with this album, but I want to do a live act that will not disappoint the techno fans. Maybe there's some people in the audience who only know the album. They should be happy too. They would be like, oh, that's cool. That's a different version that I'm used to. And again, here we go. There's Depeche Mode. And they gave me some inspiration, because they're playing some of their old tracks in a new structure, some like heavy drum parts in the middle of it, where you're just like, and the crowd is going wild and it goes back into the track. So far, I have failed with Burn Slow. I've completely failed that. I didn't even try to make club mixes on my own. There were amazing club mixes for this album, from Anna, from Radio Slave. Bjarki did an amazing mix. But here with this one, I want to do basically a functioning dance version of every track that I can play live, and I'll get to create the whole atmosphere in one thing. There's so much more to discover and to lose those limits again.
Well, it's been fun listening to your work, discovering the different moods of Chris Liebing. And thank you so much for joining me here on Rave to the Grave. It was a total pleasure.
Vivian, thank you so much for having me. A lot of fun for you.
Rave to the Grave is recorded at the historic Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center in the heart of New York City. This show is hosted and produced by me, Vivian Host. Our engineers are superstar Joe Hazen and Hassan Insane. Our theme song is by Star Eyes. For information on the rest of the music in this episode, plus fun links and archival material, check us out on the web at ravetothegrave.org or follow us on Instagram at ravetothe.grave. You can listen to Rave to the Grave on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, permission to party.